welcome you all to La Creole's first program of the year. My name is Mia James Alexis, and I am the program chair of La Creole. I'm excited to welcome you all to our first program of the year entitled Buried History, Finding Our Roots. This documentary takes viewers on a journey with veteran journalist Warren Bell Jr., who discovered unknown parts of his own family history and lesser known aspects of NOLA's unique Black history. Mr. Bell is a native New Orleanian with a long-time presence in broadcast media as a news anchor, manager, and talk show host, in addition to producing numerous documentaries over the years. Bell anchored his first radio news broadcast in 1968 at WYLD Radio while attending St. Augustine High School here in New Orleans. 10 years later, around 1977, the Yale University graduate had returned home and made local broadcasting history as New Orleans' first African American primetime TV news anchor. In addition to his highly acclaimed media background, Warren has served in higher education and media consulting roles for the past several decades, with significant roles in all three of New Orleans HBCU universities. He presently sits on the board of several organizations, including the Spirit of Charity Foundation, providing support for underserved patients at the University Medical Center, where he serves as the president of the Board of Trustees. He is co-chair of the National Center for Black Jewish Relations at Dillard University, and also he is a proud board member of the Louisiana Creole Research Association. He is a longtime member of the National Association of Black Journalists and was the founding president of the New Orleans chapter. Warren has received numerous local and regional awards for community service, as well as his journalistic efforts over his 50-year career. Just a little tad bit of information on him. He is married, he's a proud father of 4 daughters, and a doting Papa Bell to 5 grandchildren ranging from 7 to 2. He remains an active member of St. Peter Claver Catholic Church in the Treme area, where his family's Afro-Creole roots date back almost 2 centuries, and he is a member of the Knights of Peter Claver Catholic Men's Organization. Now, I would like to turn the programming over to my cousin, Warren, so we can learn more about the buried history and finding our past. Warren?
Thank you so much, Mia. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. First time trying these headphones with the built-in mic, so bear with me, folks. Thanks so much to all of my colleagues, first of all, for that generous introduction, Mia, but also thanks to all the colleagues in Louisiana Creole Research Association for inviting me to share what I guess you could call my journey of discovery as a Creole man who always knew who I was in one respect. We always knew about the ancestors on the same side that Mia is referring to, who came from different places. But things got a lot more interesting just a few years ago. And that's how we ended up doing this half-hour documentary, because while I knew a lot of things about my mother's side of the family, the Ricards, who are all over Southeast Louisiana, all the way up to Point Coupee Parish, but also got to learn about things my daddy never knew, because my daddy was an only child. His mama had been born when her father left as she was a baby, went on to start another family. Y'all know how these stories go in our community, but it was because of this experience that I realized, wow, this whole Creole thing gets much deeper. As you pull each little string back, you find so many more things that you really weren't prepared for. Uh, Normally, when I do one of these presentations, and I've done them live, I've done them hybrid, I have to spend more time than I need to spend here explaining just what is a Creole. The Rotary Club in Slidell, I had to spend a little time helping people, even though I reminded some of them in the room, something tells me you might be a little Creole too, even if you don't know what that was. But we know that our heritage is now on fire in terms of research interest, et cetera. Uh, we don't always appreciate it in our own backyard, though. And in a sense, I'm talking about this as we look at the documentary as well. But researchers have now finally started really highlighting the many contributions that Creoles of color to Louisiana have made to the world. In addition to Louisiana, today those descendants, us, take a lot more pride in those accomplishments, but that was not always the case. And I'm going to talk about that after the show, because some of you who tuned in early may have heard me spouting off about the things we talked about then versus now, then being in the era of Black awareness and Black pride. But as a young man, I remember the first time I read the name Ricard in a book. It was the story about one of my ancestors who had a plantation up in, I think, the Donaldsonville area, and who sold that plantation. And that's how the records show Cyprien Ricard selling a plantation just as the Civil War was about to erupt. And I'm pretty sure it was in the $600,000 range. So you can imagine how many millions of dollars that might be worth in today's dollars. For the record, we don't know what happened to that money. I wish we did. And if I've got any of those Ricard cousins on the line, maybe they can help later in the show. But imagine what it was like knowing about family that owned slaves when you're growing up in the 1960s like I was, and people don't really want to talk about that in any company, except perhaps in amongst our own elders. So that may explain, I think, why some of us sort of took a while to decide to be more interested in those roots that we all seem to share in terms of mixed genealogy, et cetera. Mia has to always remind me we're cousins. And I always am amazed at all the people who truly are cousins, because in my case, my mother was one of 14. My dad may have been an only child, but on the maternal side, those Ricards made up for that, and then some. But speaking of my mother, this is how it turns out I ended up doing this story, and this is the wrap up. We are about to cue the video, okay? Because this is what we hope you really came to see. I think it was the end of 2019 when I had just finished going through the family anguish of burying a second brother. And my mama called me in. My dad had already passed on. And she said, you know, you walk around life acting like you don't realize you're going to die someday. You saw what your sister-in-law just went through, burying your brother Gavin. Don't you know we have that tomb down at St. Louis Cemetery? No, we ain't going there because my dad was already in their final resting place, and mom has now joined him. I wish she were here, obviously. But she said, why don't you look into it? And so begins my journey, finding a tomb that I had not been to but once when my own grandmother was put there. And the only other time it had been opened since then, which was 1985, was one more time when we had an uncle on my mom's side who had no place else to go. But the more I found out, the more I realized what I didn't know, what my dad never knew about his own ancestors. And so began the journey that leads to this half hour. David Jones, my director, editor, is going to join me later because this was sometimes an arduous journey. I hope it has a pleasant, happy ending, and I can give you some news on that. But first, please join us for this our homage to the buried history of all of our ancestors at St. Louis Cemetery, number 2.
Ellen, we can't hear anything.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me begin again. Thank you for your patience.
Click the double arrows, Helen,
Yeah,
to get it to the beginning.
okay. Okay.
New Orleans has been one of the world's favorite destination cities for a long time, thanks to more than 300 years of a rich and culturally diverse history. Its culinary traditions have earned a worldwide reputation for food that's sometimes different, but always delicious. When it comes to music, New Orleans invented its own, called jazz, now loved around the world. Even the way it says farewell to loved ones with music and dance spilling into the streets is iconic. But that's only one way New Orleans is different in how it buries loved ones. Its oldest and most historic cemeteries, even in their decline, are witnesses to a multicultural history and resting places to ancestors who contributed to that history. Some of us have reconnected to lost parts of their family histories right here at St. Louis Cemetery number 2, a site representing over 2 centuries worth of buried history. This story begins for me right here inside the historic St. Louis number 2 cemetery after I inherited a tomb passed on by my grandmother to my parents. They made their own arrangements elsewhere. Unfortunately, I had not been at this tomb since 1985. That's when my grandmother, John Florence Bean, was buried here. Nor did we know much about the man she was named after, her father, John Bean, whose name is inscribed in marble above the vault erected for him in 1917. But that was only the beginning of my personal journey of discovery. Locating the tomb itself inside the 3 blocks that make up St. Louis number 2 required an online visit first to the Historic New Orleans Collection's cemetery database. Howard Margot at the Historic New Orleans Collection explains the collaboration.
The 3 primary partners were THNOC, Tulane University, and State by Cemeteries. St. Louis 1 and 2 were the oldest, and in that sense, the most endangered of these historic cemeteries. The survey that was done in the 80s preserved some information that's not there anymore. Right now, we have the data and the photographs for St. Louis 1 and all 3 squares of St. Louis 2. But there are 6, 7 more cemeteries that have to undergo that same process. It's both a tool for genealogists, people simply looking for family names and ancestors. That's a really easy way to find them if they're in the database. And it's also a tool for preservationists.
Using basic online tools and with help from local genealogist Jari Honore, I learned that my great-grandfather had been the 5th offspring of a union between a French émigré and a slave girl nicknamed Annie. In the New Orleans of the 1840s, immigrants are pouring into the city from Ireland, from Germany, from France. One of those foreign French, les Français étrangers, as they call them, was Jean Vignes. He's a wood and coal merchant. And in 1854, he acquires Agathe, and at that point, there are 2 children, Léon and Marie. So here we have an enslaved woman who is a domestic. She's a cook, very skilled cook, forming a relationship with this French immigrant and ultimately securing her freedom as a result of that relationship. The Frenchman's 1864 will reaffirmed that he had freed Agathe and their 4 living children, plus the unborn child, my great-grandfather, who'd be born 4 months later and named Jean. Within a month, at a court-ordered estate sale, Agathe purchases all of Jean-André's assets with cash. 6 years later, census data for 1870 shows her still running the wood and coal business while living with their 5 children. We knew little about any of that history beyond my grandmother's father, Jean, having been a musician who died when she was very young. Turns out, great-grandfather, better known by his stage name, Ratty John Bean, was one of the city's original trap set drummers and apparently quite a character, according to music legend Denny Barker, who related hearing about him as a child.
Ratty John Bean was the boss of the drummers downtown. Ratty John Bean had a mustache, but he was the boss drummer. Everybody respected John Bean. They call him Ratty, not R-A-T-T-Y. It's 2 words, and the R-A-D-D-Y, Ratty.
Digging further, I learned that my great-grandfather, the drummer, also worked at the family's wood and coal business. even maintaining a warehouse in the infamous Storyville district where fellow musicians could rehearse. His oldest brother, Leon Andre, a drayman, delivered merchandise around the city. Turns out that Leonville also belonged to Economy Hall, a society of successful Black men in New Orleans committed to the advancement of their people. Award-winning author Fatima Shaik's pivotal work, Economy Hall, documents their inspiring history starting in 1836.
They were rooted in New Orleans at least 2 generations by the time they started the Economy Hall. They had education. Many of them had wealth that they had either bought from Haiti or they had gotten inherited wealth. Some of them had freed themselves or had their parents free them. So they were people who had become free men of color by 1836 through many different means. The Hall had a library. We didn't have libraries. We're most of the Blacks in New Orleans, about half, the half that were enslaved, 55% that were enslaved, were banned from reading and writing. So for the society to establish a library in 1836 meant that their people, their men, could come in there and sit there and read. What you started seeing creep into the American consciousness around the 1850s, and this had to do a lot with the Civil War, was an idea of white supremacy. In fact, there was a slave owner's manual that I used as a source, and it said that the color of the slave is the badge of his servitude and does well to make him believe it is so. So, I mean, that just like hit me like a ton of bricks, because not only were they saying that this was going to be the marker for keeping people enslaved or as servants, but did well to make them believe it. These people did not feel they were inferior to anybody, and they did not buy it. They just did not buy that what was being put out there, that Black people were unequal in some way. So they knew they had education, they knew they had wealth, they had land, they did anything anybody else could do, except for these restrictions, these legal restrictions on them. So when people would say, well, you are inferior, it didn't even cross their mind that, you know, of course not. African blood has nothing to do with your equality.
Those same Economy Hall records include a passage noting the death and burial of my great-great-uncle Leon in 1905, 7 years before his mother, the former slave Agatha, who lived on until 1912. Both are buried here at Leon's family tomb inside Square 3 of St. Louis Cemetery number 2. By the turn of the century, the extended Veen family lived at this home in the 900 block of Bienville. Other family members living there included Leon's daughter, Leontine Veen, the first Black female teacher ever hired by the Orleans Parish School Board, assigned to the famous colored waifs home where she taught the great Louis Armstrong. Leontine was its headmistress, but we were unable to confirm her identity in this group photo taken during that period. We also located this vintage local ad inside the annual Woods Directory, printed to promote businesses of color for La Coralie, a business offering ladies' fitted corsets sold by Cora Bean Wilson from that same family address on Bienville. So here's the home on Bienville Street where 3 generations of my Veen family ancestors lived, including the former slave Agave, her firstborn son Leon, Leon's daughter Leontine, the school teacher, and a granddaughter Cora, who operated her ladies' corset shop from the same location. Unfortunately, like so many New Orleans families with such memories that have withered, nobody passed on those stories to any of us. Even though some of the resources needed for family research are easier to access than one might imagine. At the Orleans Civil District Court's Notarial Archives Research Center, citizens can always access historical records dating back more than 3 centuries. We visited the Research Center as Clerk of Court Chelsea Richard Napoleon kicked off a month-long series of October activities to educate citizens on how to utilize those records as another invaluable tool for family history, property, even architectural and landscaping research. The St. Louis Cemetery number 2 was formally consecrated in August of 1823 34 years after the first St. Louis cemetery was established under Spanish rule in 1789. Both sites fulfilled the young city's need to accommodate burials outside of the French Quarter. The old St. Peter Cemetery property had been decommissioned to allow for more commercial development inside the quarter. Custody of both new cemeteries was entrusted to the Cathedral Deanery, but space was designated for non-Catholics too. Both sites also allowed burials of New Orleans free blacks who were usually Catholic and who already made up a sizable part of its population long before any Emancipation Proclamation. A walk through St. Louis number 2's 3 sprawling squares reveals its rows of distinctive wall vaults, making up 11 of its total 12 exterior brick walls. Then there's rows and rows of iconic above-ground tombs reflecting various cultures and architectural influences, fascinating to our visitors.
New Orleans, South Louisiana did not invent above-ground tombs. They existed in Europe before they were built here, but they sort of became a trademark here because once that style was established, people realized it didn't make sense to dig graves anymore.
Besides those rows of family tombs giving cause to the description cities of the dead, another fascinating architectural attraction are the once majestic and historically significant society tombs dotting the landscape like skyscrapers.
For individuals who did not have their own family burial site, they were buried together in a society tomb.
The reason that many people joined these benevolent type societies was that they wanted burial insurance, they wanted health insurance. If anything would happen to them, the society would give money to the widow and the family, and the society would bury this person.
On a hopeful note, Catholic Cemeteries has announced a campaign that would, in its words, raise critical funding to jumpstart the full restoration of 10 select society tombs within the St. Louis number 2 cemetery through an apprentice trades partnership. That partnership with the New Orleans Master Crafts Guild would recruit paid apprentices from the local community to learn the highly sought after career skills of masonry and plastering while helping Master Guild craftsmen to repair and reconstruct those landmark but long neglected society tombs. Those tombs are now crumbling at an alarming rate, just like this one in Square 3 that required emergency repairs. St. Louis number 2 remains an active cemetery where burials still take place despite the deteriorating conditions inside. This service was for a member of the Sisters of the Holy Family, all of whom are buried here, along with their foundress, Mother Henriette DeLille. Mother DeLille is the young free woman of color who in 1836 founded the Sisters of the Holy Family. Now she's a candidate for sainthood. All of the sisters are buried in multiple tombs right here at Square 3. Some families still maintain longtime traditions like visiting their ancestors' tombs on All Saints' Day. Some still maintain and touch up those tombs themselves to prevent further decline.
Everybody would be out there painting the tomb, freshening them up, put fresh flowers for All Saints, for All Souls Day. And it was a nice social occasion.
These photos depict what my great-grandfather's tomb looked like in late 2021 when I began this journey. It had been over 25 years since the tomb had been used, but despite deterioration, it was still structurally sound. Ultimately, I decided to restore the tomb despite the presence of many more deteriorated and abandoned tombs nearby. These scenes were taken as a second coat of paint was being applied to complete the restoration. Also, we decided to opt for perpetual care at that site. Capital improvement needs across this cemetery are tremendous, and Catholic Cemeteries maintains a donor-funded abandoned tomb initiative to restore some of those individual abandoned structures. We were allowed to document this abandoned tomb restoration from start to finish as it was stripped of its original exterior mortar, then repaired using traditional plastering techniques before being fully restored over a span of several weeks. Sadly, a great many family tombs at this historic site have no more descendants to reclaim ownership or the resources to restore them like some of us have elected to do. Born and raised in California, Lynn Dosty knew her Louisiana ancestors had come from the St. Francisville area and from New Orleans, a place that she had visited only once. Like many other families, they moved to California seeking better opportunities in a less virulent racial climate. Lynn's father knew that his grandparents had been les gens de couleur libre, that is to say, free people of color, and that they were Catholic. Also, that they were buried in New Orleans. But life changed after inheriting a trove of early photo cabinet cards and other documents providing clues and confirmation about her NOLA ancestors, including them being interred at St. Louis Cemetery number 2.
In this tomb, we have my first, second, and third great-grandmother, and my third and fifth great-grandfathers.
Lynn Dosty began doing her own basic family research online using organizations and resources available to all, including the Louisiana Creole Research Association and the New Orleans Public Library, where she met us to share some of her own journey of discovery.
Those photos, when they returned to me 3 years ago, I said, it's time to put a story to these photographs, to discover who they were. And that brought me to New Orleans. So I knew my great-grandmother was Hortensia Pierre Mitchell, and I could still hear my grandmother say her name. And I knew she was a seamstress, and she worked at Haspel Brothers. It was not just a working relationship, it was also a business relationship. So she had a long history with Haspel Brothers. And she chose to stay in New Orleans when her daughter moved to California.
The New Orleans Public Library's Louisiana Division City Archives provides resources and services for people like Lynn Dosty reconnecting with family history. Archivist Greg Osborne is also a genealogist who recommends resources within everyone's reach.
The obituary is a great place to start with your research, and very easy, because they provide so much information. They give not only your year of birth, your date of death, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, your nickname, where the funeral will take place, and where you're buried. And so many people are looking for where their ancestors are buried.
My father has been searching for their grave site since 1962. He is now 80 years old, ill, and not able to take that heritage tour. And we just found the tomb this year.
Lynn Dosty was still pursuing her ancestral history with a passion when we touched base in the fall of 2023, compiling boxes of folders stuffed with more birth and more marriage records, including cemetery records wherever available. For Lynn, it's become a sacred duty.
It's important for us to keep their legacy alive.
Imagine growing up in Minnesota, knowing your family had moved from NOLA during your childhood, but really knowing very little else. For historian and author Mark Roudané, only after his father's death did he make a profound discovery, not only about his ancestors' role in New Orleans history, but also about his own Creole identity that his parents left behind in New Orleans.
I was born in this city in 1951. My family eventually moved north to Chicago. My father passed away in 2005. And while I was going through his papers, I discovered an oddly unlabeled binder. And I opened it up, and the first picture I saw was a Black man named Louis Charles Roudané. This man was his great-grandfather, and that he was the founder of the South's first Black newspaper, Le Union, and the founder of America's first Black daily, the New Orleans Tribune. Now understand that I grew up in Jim Crow New Orleans, raised and steeped in whiteness. And when this came to me, when this gift came to me, I cannot find words to describe the emotions that were swirling around me. I felt proud, of course. I felt excited. I felt angry immediately. Had a kept secret. Why was this kept from me? I knew in my bones why it was kept from me. All right. My father did everything he could to walk away from so much as one drop of blackness in his DNA. It completely, in a moment, changed me. I was no longer who I thought I was. I was something else. I wasn't sure at the time, but I knew that I had been struck by lightning, and I was in a state of shock. I find out that my great-great-grandfather was a medical doctor here in the city. He was educated at the Faculty of Medicine of Paris, the finest, most advanced medical school in the world. And while he was there, he participated in the 1848 revolution, a revolution that witnessed the end of all slavery in France and French colonies by law, a revolution that created equality regardless of your skin color. He participated in that revolution. He comes back to Louisiana in 1856 with a liberation mindset. Free people of color had a degree of autonomy and wealth and education when he left. When he came back, the city had become Americanized. There was no longer this social construct of enslaved, white, and free people of color. All of a sudden, the Americans wanted binary. You're either black or you're white. That's what he came back to. And when he came back, soon thereafter, the Union Army liberated the city in May of 1862. And he, along with his brother, John Baptiste Roudané, Paul Trevine, and other members of the free colored community got together. And in their words, in the words of Arnold Bartonell, we opened our hearts to hope. Things were going to change. And they had that hope. That's why he started the newspaper.
Mark Roudané located the tomb of his great-grandfather, the founder of the New Orleans Tribune newspaper, Dr. Louis Charles Roudané, inside St. Louis Cemetery number 1, where his parents actually photographed him as a child before leaving New Orleans behind. He then located 2 more tombs of his ancestors inside St. Louis Cemetery number 2. Like others with ancestral tombs there, Roudané worries that most New Orleanians don't even realize how many of this city's earliest Black achievers and history makers of all backgrounds are buried at the historic site.
Warren, here lies Marie Couvent, born enslaved in West Africa, held captive, put on a ship, and sent to Saint Domingue. Eventually, she ends up after the revolution in Louisiana, okay? She becomes quite entrepreneurial and along with her husband accumulates a great deal of wealth. Before her death, she writes a will and she stipulates that any money that's left, which was considerable, would go to the establishment of the Catholic home for indigent colored orphans. That's exactly what happened.
Here in square number 3 of St. Louis number 2 Cemetery, the history makers and culture bearers are literally all around us. This is the tomb of Oscar J. Dunn. He was Louisiana's first elected Black lieutenant governor, and according to all the newspaper accounts, when he died, his funeral procession was followed by thousands of mourners.
In 1980, the NAACP commissioned just a brief little pamphlet on St. Louis Cemetery number 2, Square 3. And in that pamphlet, Joe Logsdon, the late professor at UNO, he said that St. Louis number 2, Square 3 was the most significant collection of memorials to African Americans in the world. So many of the sites that were integral to our history are gone.
The gates here at St. Louis Cemetery number 2 have been closed to public visitors ever since the COVID pandemic. Exterior signage that used to identify the cemetery and how to contact the Catholic Cemetery's office was removed by 2023. Family descendants can still obtain a visitor's pass, but many New Orleans families have allowed the knowledge of their ancestors or even where they're buried to be lost to successive generations. Besides launching an initiative to repair some of the crumbling society tombs, Catholic Cemeteries advised us in late 2023 there were no other discussions underway to do further repairs. In addition, no plans underway to reopen the site to any public visitors in the foreseeable future, even on a limited basis. Meanwhile, all of their other cemeteries, with the exception of St. Louis number 1, remain open to visitors free of charge.
It doesn't matter whether we have individual family tombs in St. Louis Cemetery or not. That heritage belongs to all of us. That story is important to all Americans. It's American history. It's Black history, but it's American history.
Most people don't read history with emotion. They read it with despair. Right? But it's emotion things.
Visitors to New Orleans can only hope that someday these locked gates at St. Louis number 2 will finally be reopened so the rest of the world can marvel at these memorials to so many New Orleans history makers and culture makers. And unless more of us come to their aid, the crumbling bricks of these historic resting places at St. Louis Cemetery number 2 will continue to crumble away. Victims of time, victims of the elements, and victims of our neglect. Hopefully, too, the souls and the history buried at St. Louis Cemetery number 2 will someday enjoy their well-deserved recognition and respect.
So if you think you have the time, you don't. It is up to us, those who are alive and available, to reclaim our history and to keep their legacy alive. It's very important. And in doing so, you not only discover about them, you discover who you are.
Well, that was our documentary, Buried History, Finding Our Past. We are honored here today to have some of the participants in the documentary. And I will ask them all to take a moment to describe their experience, things they learned, things they may want to share with you all. Afterwards, we're gonna have a Q&A. We do ask that you put it in the Q&A section of the webinar, and Helen and I will monitor it and get the questions out, and then one of the participants in the documentary will be glad to answer those questions. And if we have to get back with you on something we may not know at this time, we will. So I'm going to ask David Jones, who's the director of the documentary, to say a few words.
I had to unmute. Okay. Yeah, this was a pleasure. Warren and I have worked together for probably close to 40 years and doing quite a few different types of programs and RTA updates and things on Hano and quite a few things. So this one, we're both basically retired. And he had the brilliant idea of us applying to the New Orleans Tourist and Cultural Fund, which we got a grant fairly easily. And I've been doing this for 50 years. I've never gotten a grant like that easily and that important. They didn't waste any time. They just got it to us quickly. We're also very lucky to have gotten Fatima, Mark, and Lynn. Of course, as you saw, Lynn got the last word in the whole show, which is probably the most important thing, is that you think you have time to do this, you don't. If you're going to be looking at your family's history, you've got to do it while there's still family around to help you do it, because it's really critical. I'm doing that with my own family right now. I'll turn it over now.
Lynn, you want to say a few words? You're
Turn
on
on
mute.
your mic, please.
You're on mute. Lynn?
Okay, there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, this has been a beautiful journey, and I really thank Mark Roudané and Fatima, David, and also Warren for being a huge part of this, instrumental in my research. But like the film noted, that receiving these cabinet cards, I had them over 20 years ago, and they returned to me 3 years ago. Almost 4 now, and I just wanted to put a story to them, but I have discovered so much during this time, who I'm related to, and even going back to the founding of New Orleans, and to have these photographs, and not only photographs, documents. My grandmother was considered the keeper of records. So I have midwife receipts, Civil War records, originals, also 100-year-old baptisms. And being the person that inherited, I think it's very important for me to see their legacy through. And it's not just a hobby for me, it is a passion, and I really wouldn't prefer to be doing anything else than completing this journey. So I thank you all for being a part of it.
Mark, would you say a few words?
Well, I just wanted Lynn to know that I went and got to my hat rack when I saw how she came styling this morning. And so I hope you all can see that when I bought this, I thought about Lynn because she has the greatest collection of hats in the world.
Oh,
And I'm just trying to catch up. But anyway, this one I got to wear whenever we go somewhere, Lynn.
okay.
And finding Lynn was a pleasure. I read about her through a New Orleans Library news article, and I immediately know she had to tell part of the story. And here's the blessing. I was blessed that my family tomb, at least we still had papers on. But imagine having, I mean, she's got a treasure chest when it comes to so many things I wish I had in terms of photos of my grandparents, great grandparents, and even the Frenchman, even the slave woman on my dad's side. I mean, we never knew any of that. So, Lynn, we love you, dear. Okay, thank you for being part of this morning. I'm so happy.
Thank you.
Fatima, would you like to say a few words? You're on mute, Fatima.
I'm not hearing.
Thank you for being patient, everybody.
Oh,
I'm on, right?
yes.
We can't see you anymore, but we can hear you.
Oh, I lost the, okay. Well, I am just happy to be here with everyone. When Warren told me about the project and I met him and David, it was really thrilling to know that they were doing this, to see people going out and doing more discovery about their roots. I mean, when I joined La Creole, people had been doing that and it just seemed to catch on, and it was lovely that Warren did this. I think it's a beautiful documentary, and I was glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mark?
I will echo what everyone just said, and deep appreciation to Warren and David for making this film documentary. I think it really hopefully will lead to some changes. We can eventually see more restoration especially in St. Louis Cemetery #2. We can see those gates unlocked so that the public can go in to these really incredible sites of memory. And we have a right to those memories. That's sacred ground. That's hallowed space. And when I walk into St. Louis #2, I always bring flowers, but I spend time to think about the lives of the people who live there. My great uncle, Jean-Baptiste Roudané, buried in Square 3. He was the publisher of the New Orleans Tribune. He was a man who, along with Arnold Bartneau, delivered the petition of the free colored population of
Yep.
Louisiana to Abraham Lincoln,
Yep.
demanding the right to vote. There's a story. His mother, Amy Potens, is buried in Square 3. Amy Potens, born enslaved in New Orleans in 1792. She was a midwife and a healer, and she managed to accumulate a fair amount of wealth after she became a free woman of color. She was actually manumitted by her own mother, Charbrion, who is also buried in Square 3. Imagine that.
Oh.
Her mother purchased her daughter's freedom, as was allowed under Spanish colonial law at that time. Or Charlotte, okay? Aimé's mother. She was born enslaved in 1764. And she had the grit and determination to accumulate over a period to purchase her own freedom. The point I'm getting to is all of these things have these stories. Our
Yes.
ancestors there. And our hearts to our ancestors and learn from them. Looking down on us. Something changes inside of us. Okay, we feel connected, to past generations in a way that is simply profound. So I wanted to say how important the cemetery is to me and to all of us. And again, to thank everyone involved in this project for recovering this history. It's an act of restorative justice. Thank you very much.
Warren, I'm going to ask you to make your final comments before we start taking
Sure.
Q&A. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sitting here smiling, but also almost teary, because without those folks you just heard from, my story wouldn't have been a good story to tell. It would have been quasi-interesting. But I'm reminded that Marc Roudané's great uncle, Jean-Baptiste Roudané, is in the same tomb where my wife's family ended up acquiring that tomb years later, and they are there. So when we say small world and so much interconnectivity, that's real. But something else, because this has to do with how this journey began. I remember the initial time I learned that my grandmother's dad had an older brother who was born before the Frenchman had acquired the slave woman, but they were obviously hooking up all the time between him meeting her and him purchasing her. But his name was Leon. And I think I put that in Facebook, and it was the wonderful Fatima Shaik who sent me a message saying, there's a Leon V in the Economy Hall records. You might want to check that out. So whenever I tell people this analogy, it's so real. It's like pulling a thread from a ball of yarn. But the more you pull, the more you find along the path of what's embedded into that piece of yarn that is your own family history. And that was one more reason I said, I got to tell this story. Because at the end of the day, the message, as David said in his remarks, the reason we use that last comment from Lynn Dosty is so true, because David is now looking into his ancestry and trying to document more. And I'm smiling because as he told you guys that, I had noticed, I said, wait, when did this happen? And I said, oh, right. We spent 2 years pursuing this buried history. And now he's realizing he's got other stuff to unearth. And I would hope that all of the folks who've watched this have that takeaway more than anything else. Get what you can learn from your elders now, because once we become ancestors, we are mute. And I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to ask whoever wants to take any of these questions, or you know the answer, but one person wrote the Vines. Or do any of you know if they're related to the Lavine, Lavigne family of Imperial St. Landry Parish? Because the person said that they're a descendant of Narcisse Levine and his father, Ogre Levine. If any of y'all aware of that?
You know, unless Jari Honore is here and can comment, I would pass on that. I have a feeling not. Um, the funny thing is, I have a Ricard cousin whose last name is Levine. But as far as we know, there's no connection. We certainly know that names sometimes had the la deleted or added. But in this case, the Frenchman who came here with a brother, the surname was Vines, Vignes. I wish I knew more about that brother, but the story I heard was that he had sort of vanished after going off to serve in the Civil War, which I think means he may not have survived the Civil War. But that's all we know. I don't think so. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Let me answer that a little bit. The Levines were also in Economy Hall. If this person wants to contact me, I can send them what I have on the Levines because their names popped up a lot. I don't know whether the Levines and the Vines are related, but there is some Italian connection, I believe. I don't know. Yeah.
Let me say this one because I'm actually, so we have 3 board members of La Creole on here right now. That would be Fatima, myself, and Warren. Helen, if you could tell people if they have like additional questions, like she just said, they can contact us, give them the email to La Creole so that they can send any of these questions we can answer right now to that so we can get back with them. Would you mind giving them that?
I'm going to put it into the chat.
That's fine, but could you say it also?
Yeah, our website is lacreole.org, LACREOLE.org. And you can contact us at info@lacreole.org, but I'm going to put it in the chat as well.
And those questions will be to the correct person. The next question we have is, where is St. Louis Cemetery number 2?
That's an easy one. It is the boundaries are North Claiborne Avenue, beginning the 2nd block, that is to say, Iberville. It extends for 3 full city blocks. The rear side is Robertson Street, and the far eastern side, which is where my tomb is located in Square 1, that is St. Louis Street. So if you were to leave St. Louis number 1 and walk 4 blocks straight down, you'd end up at the entrance to the what was our 2nd existing cemetery, and that is St. Louis number 2. You pass it every time you pass over the French Quarter on the I-10. I have learned to be able to look over at a certain point, and yes, I can verify the tomb is still sitting right where it is, gleaming white, after that 2nd coat of paint you guys saw in the video. So yeah, it's right in the heart of downtown, a block off Canal Street.
So this goes into some of the stuff that we've been discussing as a board. One question was, how can we best financially support restoration of St. Louis Cemetery number 2 to ensure it's preserved and reopened, as well as a person who says that I have 2 tombs that I know of that I am connected to as a descendant of Creoles of color in New Orleans. But this person, they're interested in potentially restoring it. However, they live in Seattle, and they're wondering if anyone there would be able to help them research them.
Well,
so
I would.
Question is, they have some people who have tombs in it. Then the other piece is the research as well as the restoration, which is something we're looking at in La Creole. We can't do them all, but we're looking at hopefully to do at least one.
Well, if I can chime in, it's one of the things I'm working on in a great deal of detail. Again, I have not updated the board yet, but to the more general question, there are, I'm guessing, hundreds of families who may know vaguely that someone was buried there, but who don't understand that that is real property, as in real estate property. It comes with a deed, and the position of archdiocesan cemeteries is that you have to probably do your own diligence to be able to establish for them the direct line of descendancy. But if you do that, kind of like going through probate, I guess, but if you're willing to do that, there are forms you complete, and at the end of the day, you're issued a new title. Now, in my case, my grandmother actually transferred ownership to my dad long before she passed away, and then they held it. And my mom held it long after my dad passed. But the truth is, it is passed down in a very patriarchal way, if you know what I'm saying. And so it had to be a descendant of my father who is now the owner, not someone who comes into the family from my mom's side. Thus, once my siblings took care of the paperwork, I became the sole owner, put in a few dollars to restore. But more to the question, first of all, yes, there are people here who can help. There are also resources here. And the documentary could only be a half hour because of things I'm not going to go into. We thought it would be an hour so we could take more time. But in each and every bit of the story, I'm showing you different resources that were right there. Historic New Orleans Collection has that cemetery database for St. Louis #2 and St. Louis #1, the New Orleans Public Library. And oh, by the way, and I had to be reminded of this, but Catholic Cemetery's website does have an opportunity to link in to a really involved series that they did a few years ago. It's like a 3 or 4 part series for people who want to get immersed into pursuing family history, into developing their own skills in genealogy, because otherwise you end up usually having to hire someone. And I'm blessed. One of my Veen relatives had already hired the great Jerry Honoré to do some research on the family. So when I found out Jerry's name, I reached out and he immediately had information that actually whet my appetite, saying, wait, there is a story here. And that was what led to those events that led to me saying, wait a minute, I'd like to tell a story. And somebody actually whispered in my ear, have you heard about the New Orleans Tourism and Culture Fund? So we were blessed to get a fund, a grant from that fund, and we're able to use that to complete not only the 30-minute half-hour documentary, but also before that, last fall, in honor of the 2nd century of St. Louis #2, we did an anniversary piece that was only 10 minutes long, but that we wanted to use as another means of calling to folks' attention. This place is so rich with our history and yet so neglected. I can help the Seattle family if they reach out, at least to steer them in the right direction. But Mia, if I might, I'd like to update the board and my members as well as our viewers. I have had another conversation very recently with the folks at Archdiocesan Cemeteries. I will say that I'm very encouraged. There might be some opportunities for organizations who care, like La Creole and supporters of our mission, to support efforts to partner with the Archdiocese on restoring tombs after we identify their relevance and significance. And I think we're going to be able to have a good continued conversation about that with hopefully some news for the board within the next month, I'm thinking. But this is all very sudden. I met with them just 2 days ago. So I'd rather say more later, but I believe that Catholic Cemeteries means it. And I think most of my friends on this Zoom call know that that's a lot coming from me. I'm beginning to think they mean it when they say, no, that cemetery will be preserved. Money is always the big piece of that. And I can tell you that there's one society tomb restoration almost finished right now. And I've been able to get back inside and shoot some of that. And it's a beautiful job. But I'm told that job is still in the 5 figures, but it's in the high 5 figures just to do one society tomb, which is going to be a gorgeous piece, but still surrounded by the squalor that's been allowed to happen over 2 centuries. I'm not going to dwell on why it was allowed to happen anymore in my life, because my life, I don't know how much more of it there is. But I would encourage people to stay tuned, because I'm hoping that we can initiate a fund that will attract bigger funders later, but whose premise will be to identify one project at a time. And in partnership with the Archdiocese, we can begin to make a difference at St. Louis #2, but only so long as they promise that at the end of the day, we will see that cemetery reopened again to visitors. And my thought is, visitors don't mind paying an admission fee if they're guaranteed that part of that fee is plowed right back into restoring the cemetery. So I don't want to get too far off on that tangent, but I'm very encouraged by that, because that was my greatest concern when I ran into some roadblocks a year and a half ago as I was pursuing this project.
Thank you. As you can see, Helen has pulled up the Catholic Cemetery's website.
That's it.
She also put some of the information in the chat area for you guys. And when at the end, you will be getting a survey and email. We look forward to that, but we'll go ahead on and add that type of information in this email
Sure.
that you receive.
May I offer one comment? I see Helen has the cursor pointed to donate purchase. I don't want to tell people what to do with their funds, but if this is the cause, and if what you just heard me describe sounds like what you'd like to support, understand that if you make a general donation to what they call their Abandoned Tomb Initiative, you're just giving them money and telling them to spend it on whatever cemetery they wish. I've asked them to perhaps take a different approach to that, but as of now, if a donation is made on that website to an Abandoned Tomb Initiative at that site, you're not really doing what I'm describing. And I am intent upon having an option for people within the next month to 2 months, with the cooperation and support of my La Creole board members. I don't want to create a separate fund. I'd love to see La Creole do this, and if I need to do some startup effort when it comes to that, then I'm more than willing to do that. But I think I'm getting in the weeds. I will recommend people visit that website, because that series of seminars on how to do your own family history is actually very good, and it's very detailed, as long as you're willing to sit through 3 or 4 different segments, because it's like attending a course. But that's the beauty of it. You will be then empowered with the skills you need to pursue those buried stories in your own family history.
Okay, so this question is directed to Ms. Lynn. Would her Mitchell ancestry have connections to the Mitchell family in St. James Parish?
Well, I can't, it's possible, but I can't confirm. But I do have extensive documentation concerning my Mitchell family. I do know that one section of them came from Donaldsonville in Ascension Parish area. But I also have DNA connections that go pretty far as well. So if you'd like to reach out to me, if you did your ancestry DNA, it is very possible, because quite a few of us have, and we're all connected to that direct line of mine. So it's okay to give her my information, or she can message me in the chat and I can give it to her or him. No problem.
So a couple of people are asking specifically about cemeteries and different names, and I think we've kind of covered some of that based on the things that we're putting in the chat, the websites and stuff. And then again, you can also email us at lacreole.org, or go on our website,
Right.
and probably help as see fit. But some people are questioning whether or not St. Louis Cemetery was closed. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Some of them are open, some of them are closed. Would you expand on that?
Of course.
And what we can actually go into, and other things you really can't, you have to have permission to go into. So can you explain that a little bit?
Happy to do that, because there is confusion out there. First of all, St. Louis #1 is the oldest standing extant, I think is the word I used in one of my descriptions, cemetery in New Orleans. Opened in 1789 before we even became part of America. It was still under Spanish rule. St. Louis number 2 opened in 1823. St. Louis 1, you can go back 100 years and read columns and opinion articles complaining about the conditions inside. So what's happening at number 2 is not really unique in that sense, but St. Louis number 1 has since had some things done to ameliorate its condition. But the bottom line is there are no new burials there. Well, unless your name is Nicolas Cage and you can afford to build a tomb over presumably someone else's. Don't ask me to explain it, but to answer the question, Mia, I'm sorry, I digress sometimes because it's complicated and perplexing sometimes how things happen when you ask them to explain something. But St. Louis 1 is open to family members who can get a card from the Archdiocese that they call a family pass, which means they verified that, yes, you have rights to one of the tombs in there. I don't think you can just say, but I'm related to them 4 generations ago. They have
Mark is actually
to
showing
know
a
who you
card.
are and what the
Warren,
connection.
Mark is actually showing the card.
Perfect. Mark has one. I have one as well. But unless you have that, the only way you can visit number 1 is to purchase a ticket for $25 from New Orleans Tours, I think is the name of the company, but they are the exclusive tour company in partnership with the Archdiocese. For years, when I asked, I was told, no, there's no direct connection in terms of how much is raised and how much is reinvested. I understand that when asked that recently, the answer given to a reporter who was trying to ask some questions was, well, sure, some money goes to that. That's not the situation I'm describing in my wish, if you will, for what they might do with number 2. But you cannot just walk in, okay? You either have a paid ticket as a tour guest or you're a family member with a pass. St. Louis number 2 was still open to public visitors, but when COVID came along, they closed the gates, never to reopen them. You can, if you have a family member there and have a family pass, you can be allowed in on appointment. But otherwise, All Saints Day is the only day in the calendar year where someone could just go in out of curiosity, if you will. And I've been there for the last couple of years consecutively on All Saints Day because I didn't have to go through any hassles of saying, hey, I'm going back with my camera. And some of the footage you all saw was taken as recently as All Saints Day of 2023. I started shooting 2 years ago, and let me stop right there and also give a shout out to Julius Evans, African-American professional videographer, who was the person we used to shoot all of our interviews. His company is called Red Clay Productions. We made a decision for the sake of economy, if you will, not economy hall, but budget economy, that I was going to shoot most of the video and still pictures, because once you get in there and start visiting and taking shots, if you have any interest in photography, it's hard to stop. And so I spent 2 years. Sometimes I get withdrawal symptoms right now saying, gee, I haven't been back at the cemetery in at least 2 weeks. Sometimes I drive by.
Warren, let me break in for a minute because
Yes,
you
please.
use terminology called All Saints Day. We have some visitors are on the webinar who are not Catholic and they do not understand what All Saints Day. Can you explain
November 1st. November 1 in the Catholic calendar is always All Saints Day. It's actually the day after Hallows Eve, Halloween, but it is the one day of the year where the public is still allowed inside the gates at St. Louis number 2. A little tip to those who might want to get a look without waiting. If you drive to the backside on Robertson Street, one of the squares is bordered on the backside by steel fence. So you can easily put a zoom lens right between the gate and get shots if that's what you want to do. But more importantly, you can still get a better sense of what you're missing when you're not allowed inside, because it's beautiful. in terms of not just architecturally speaking, but I think Mark hit the nail on the head. There are so many stories buried there. And so I would, yeah, it was my idea to call it Buried History Clever, but really it's what it's all about. There are so many of our stories and our memories that are buried right there. And to the families who are persistent and have any kind of paper trail in terms of who owned it last, they are willing to work with you. Now, you may have to pay for some research on their end, or you may have to get someone to help you on finding documents. But something I need to say, Civil District Court, the Notarial Archives office is several floors deep and has every record of every property sale, sale of slaves, sale of buildings, since since before New Orleans became New Orleans. I'm talking about 300 years of documents. Now, it's not a matter of walking in and saying, I'm looking for this. You have to really know what you're looking for. You have to have an idea of when property was sold, but the records are right there. My great grandfather, the Frenchman's will, which left everything to the slave woman, is right there. So New Orleans Public Library, again, books and books, floors and floors of resources, including death notices. So stuff is out there that doesn't require hiring a genealogist. It doesn't hurt to have one to cut through some of the mustard for you, but the resources are there, and we hopefully were able to showcase that as we told my story.
But also, All Saints Day is in the Catholic religion where we honor all of our saints. And also
Exactly.
from a human standpoint, from a living standpoint, we honor our dead. So when he's saying it's open to the public, normally for All Saints Day, when you're Catholic, you actually go and visit your family that's in the graves. You may leave flowers, whatever, say a prayer. But that is a big thing that we do in the Catholic faith. This here, we've answered that. So someone has asked the question, have you come across any interesting stories related to the records that will occur ancestors?
None that I want to talk about here. That has to be the next documentary, I think. I don't know much about that liqueur connection to the Ricard end. I knew liqueurs growing up. But there are many interesting stories about Ricards. I heard my mother throughout her life lament that two of her older brothers she never, ever got to see once they moved out as men and married up with white women. One of them moved all the way to get away from New Orleans and his family. He moved all the way to Chalmette. And I got a feeling one of his descendants is on this call. Maybe, maybe not. But when I look back at what we knew growing up and what they didn't know, so the Ricard family was notorious for that. But on my dad's side, my dad grew up a bastard because the gentleman who fathered him, who was himself a Creole man, Mr. Joseph Narcisse Bell, his parents decided that my grandmother was a little too dark, and my grandmother wasn't so dark if you saw the photo of her in there, but he ends up moving to California, never, ever again reaching out here, married a woman from Baton Rouge who was also light-skinned, and they died keeping the secret, but then along came 23andMe and Ancestry.com, and so now even his descendants know about their New Orleans connection, but my father never even knew that he had a sister growing up out there who looked a lot like, weird to say, but like my grandmother, which doesn't make sense, but he had relatives and cousins. We had cousins, and I'm looking saying, wait, these people pass for white, but California must have different, what do we have? Creole radar. We seem to be able to sense that easier than some, but lots of stories. Someone suggested to me maybe one of the reasons we don't pass everything down is because, and I had this conversation with a dear colleague of mine who isn't on this call, but he called me while the video was running, but sometimes it's because we might be embarrassed. My grandmother's dad was a scoundrel. Sure, he was a musician, and sure, he was a coal miner, but my grandmother was one of 9. He left when she was a baby to move in with another woman, even had the same name, to have more children. Then he left that person and married another person who was his wife at the time of his death. Who talks about that stuff at Thanksgiving? You know what I'm saying? And maybe that's why some of us don't have as many stories passed down as others. But what we also lose in the process is learning that he was an entrepreneur, that the other musicians visited his warehouse to learn how to play jazz, that he was an example early on of how Black men and women had their own businesses. And yet we grow up a few decades later after Jim Crow thinking we're not good for anything but working for somebody else. So many things cross my mind whenever I contemplate all the things I went through thinking about this, and they haunt me just about every night. Stuff pops up, and it is the burden we bear, but I think it really gets alleviated when we start to know more the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of our past.
Right. So someone wrote the national, and I think this is something like Creole we can just notate for ourselves. It says the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a sacred place, and possibly that would qualify for a grant. So as we're looking into things, maybe that's something we can look into, but we can put it on our things. But one of the other questions that they had was, does any of you know whether Homer Plessy is buried in St. Louis Cemetery, any of the St. Louis cemeteries?
I think Mark knows that. Mark?
He's on mute. Mark, you're on mute. Mark, you're on mute. He's looking it up, but he's on mute.
I remember he was at the dedication for the plaques honoring Homer Plessy.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Mark, we can't hear you. No, can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
Apologies. I don't know where Homer Plessy is buried. We can go to another question, and in the interim, I will take a look at Keith Medley's book and see if I can find out the answer.
Okay. Also, one person wants to know, how are we all collaborating with the French consulate in New Orleans? Well,
I'm not sure what they mean.
I guess they're asking, because there is a French consulate in New Orleans, and I remember in high school going there, and there's a lot of things we did, but I know from a La Creole standpoint, we have not collaborated since I've been involved with it, but I don't know if any of the other board members have worked with them in conjunction with La Creole that was on the board longer than me. So Fatima, do you know?
I don't know if we've been collaborating with the French consulate. I know we did have some collaboration with Alliance Française for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
I know New Foundation works with the French consulate, but I, like, as you said, I've been on the board maybe 6 years almost, and I don't think we've had anything in that time period.
Another person is asking, did we come across a connection to the La migration, meaning Louisiana to Los Angeles cemeteries in LA? Did you come across something like that?
Not in this project.
Okay.
That was well beyond that. Remember, these things, you can do all kinds of things if you have the budget of a Henry Louis Gates, but I didn't. This was me telling my story, hopefully as a cautionary tale to others to try to do a little digging before you get to be in your 70s like I was, because there's got to be so much more if you just, these days where you can take a phone out and video record a grandmother at a family reunion or something, do those things. I know so many people who've said to me, I keep saying I'm going to do that, and I'm saying, if you don't, you'll be stuck like Chuck. Yeah. I never did it with my own mother, and I knew better. And even now, I wish sometimes I could ask her to refresh my memory on stories she told long ago. And likewise, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother.
Record.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can go back.
I would like to
listen to me.
I would like to say something about the Lala connection. I know Elizabeth Rhodes did something called Gumbo Yaya a long time ago. So maybe if people want to send to info@La Creole, we could put them in touch.
Yeah.
I don't think she went into the burials, but I think she went into the families and did some interviews.
Okay. This is anyone. Does anyone know if there's any way to get records from the Narcisse Prudhomme plantation, because they're looking for information on their genealogies? Does anyone have any detail on that we can help out with?
Normally, wouldn't parish courthouse records have whatever records there might be? I'm guessing. I know anything here in New Orleans would be at the Civil District Court's notarial archives. Might be a way to start, unless someone else knows better on this call.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
In answer to Drew's question about Homer Plessy's burial site, and I didn't see anything in Key's book, and then it struck me. I walk past it every time I go into St. Louis Cemetery #1. So he lies in St. Louis Cemetery #1. There's a very nice stone marker on the side of his grave.
Someone just made a comment about their ancestor passed for white in Los Angeles during Jim Crow, claiming they were from France and filing immigration papers with the U.S. government. I think a lot of us have family members who have done that.
I think all of us have those family members. All of us.
Someone, Miss Rich, she wrote, how frequent was this? I'm not sure of your question. If you want to expound a little more.
I think she's probably referring to how often did people do that, passing for white or claiming to be.
Oh, a lot.
More than you can imagine.
Any of y'all want to talk on that?
Well, I can talk on that a little bit, not on how frequently it is, because I haven't done research on the actual data, but I can tell you that at different times, the definition of white has changed in Louisiana. So it seems to me that every time the definition changed a little bit, people passed a little bit more and a little bit more. Also, as Jim Crow got more difficult, people passed more because they were trying to get jobs. You couldn't get a job if you were a Black person here. So they would pass for white, they would move away, and some people, there are a couple of books on this. Of course, there's Bliss Broyard's One Drop. And there's another book by I think it's Yaba Bay or something. It was published in Boston, also called One Drop, about the definitions of whiteness and how it's going on. That people did pass sometimes just for like a day, So they might pass for a day to go get a job, or they might pass just for a work, and then they'll come back in the evening and live in the Black community. So the definition changes, but it was very frequent passing back and forth across the line if people were able to do it. And sometimes they did it at the expense of their Black family, and sometimes they did it to help their Black families. So,
we have a lot of answers to the questions. Yeah, white definition. A lot of our members, for example, the book that they're referring to, which I also have, is Yaba Blah's The One Drop one. One of our members also said, and also a board member said, for as long as there have been folks trying to define white, we've had folks passing for it, which is true. Yep. And one question was, this is for the question earlier, where was the Narcisse Prudhomme plantation located? Does any of y'all know where it's located? We'd have to Google that for you. Because it doesn't, I would have to look that up as well, because this is the first time I'm hearing about this plantation. I don't know if it still exists. Because even if you go along Bayou Road, where there's a whole bunch of plantations, the location is still there, but the actual plantation doesn't exist, and it's not a working plantation. But there's still information, like if you go, with Laurel Plantation or with all of that along that Bayou Road, there's a lot of information on there that you can find. So guys, we are coming to a close. This has been a wonderful, insightful and educational, oh wait, we got a couple of questions.
Haha, go for it.
Okay, I don't have to say this. So I'm going to go ahead on and not take any more questions and go ahead on and close out because we have to stop. It's, you know, we try to stay on time. La Creole is a nonprofit organization. We do put on 2 programmings for the year that's free and open to the public. Other things you normally have to be a member to participate or join in, like our conference that will be coming up in November. We do enjoy doing these things. We love to hear back from others on your thoughts of these programmings, ideas you may have, as well as, you know, good or bad criticism that you had, things that we can do better. We look forward to hearing your feedback. Our information is lacreole.org. You can do a lot of research on there. You can also join as a member if you choose to, or would like to become a member or find out more about our organization. It's out there on our website. Also, we do have a YouTube channel where we post these type of programmings as well as our conference that you can go back and look at. So if there's things that you didn't quite get here or wasn't able to write down, you can go back and review this. It will be posted out there. If you want to share our information with others, we encourage that and look forward to others exploring what we have to offer here at La Creole. And basically, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Warren, and the rest of the team for putting on a wonderful documentary and sharing it to the public.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank
Have
you.
a great evening.
We appreciate you.
Just want to
Yeah.
ask everyone to please complete the survey I put in the chat. There's a link to a Google survey. We would love to hear your feedback, and thank you for attending.
Thank you, Helen.
Yes, thank you.
You can do the survey now if you'd like.
Oh.
Yeah,
If you go to the chat, you can just click the link.
Yes, thank you.
Feedback. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.